All right, so welcome everybody to our panel on next gens in family office. I'm Rob Grimaldi. I'll be moderating today. I'm with the Scoliosi Family Office in New York City. Today we have an exciting panel, some very experienced and intelligent people I'm excited to bring to you today. We'll start with a good friend of mine and one of the most dynamic people I know, Rockaway Bernstein, next gen for the Bernstein Family Office, a venture partner with Regeneration, founder of RLB Ventures, the founder of the Spark Family Office Group, and also the chairperson for the Child Safety Pledge and the co-chair of Tell My Story. Rockaway, welcome. And then we also have Andrew Rubenstein, founder of Shorewind Capital. Andrew, maybe if you want to take a moment or two and just tell us who Shorewind Capital is.
Yeah, so Shorewind Capital is an early stage venture fund that was launched last year by myself and two partners. We're backed solely by Family Office Capital. We'll likely go out and raise outside capital in about a year or so, but for now we're basically a family investment vehicle, and we do seed-ish stage investments focused mostly on human health and on clean tech.
Fantastic, thank you. And lastly, we've got Michael Smith, CEO of Pond Valley Family Office and general partner of Regeneration VC. Michael, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, Pond Valley is a family office focused on a variety of environmental, climate tech related focuses. And Regeneration is an early stage venture fund that was that the family office helped seed, focused on the future of consumer industries, apparel, food packaging through an environmental lens.
Fantastic. And Rockaway, I don't want you to be left out here. Maybe tell a little bit about you and your story.
Yeah, so second generation. My father was the founder of Alliance Bernstein, originally from New York City. I mostly focus on child protection, child sexual abuse prevention, and mental health in my sort of impact life. I run an incredible family office community with Mike Zhu and Hassan Dayak, who were part of connecting me to this. And then I'm also proud to work with Michael at Regeneration VC on circular economy and climate tech.
Great. So thank you all for being here. And let's just jump right in. So I think, when you talk about investments and, the tech space has certainly been the sexy space that, people over the past decade or so and even longer. Everybody knows the big names, the big VCs, but family offices play a big space or a big part in that space, as well as healthcare, biotech, and then really any space that I think the three of you are involved in. And just be interested in some of your thoughts on where you think family offices are having a different impact in this space, sometimes not seen, but certainly very influential. And maybe Andrew, if you want to start us off as to how you feel, your family office in particular, but also in the industry, how family offices are impacting.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think family offices play a big role in the tech industry. A lot of them are investors themselves in those big VC funds. I think they do that for two reasons. One, just for their own sort of investment returns. The other would be so they can kind of invest directly in some of the companies that those venture funds will first invest in and sort of identify the winners. So they absolutely play a big role. You're right, they tend to be more behind the scenes. I think that's because they don't have to put in kind of as much effort into marketing. One, because they don't have to go invest, or they don't have to go raise outside capital. And then two, their value add is sort of inherent in their family name a lot of the time. So if you're a small venture fund, you sort of have to position yourself to entrepreneurs to say, we can add value by doing X, Y, and Z. If you're a family office with a big name behind you, you don't really have to make that pitch as much of the time. So they definitely play a big role, both in the sense that they invest in a lot of those companies directly, and they invest in the venture funds that sort of source them.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you talk about just the inherent value in the name, but also sort of the adding value that maybe funds and VCs don't. I don't know, Michael, if you have any thoughts as to how sort of a family office within an ecosystem, and I know with your family office in particular, the way you guys have specific expertise in different sectors are able to add value to investments as opposed to just, you know, being big check writers.
Yeah, it's a great point, and Andrew hit some really interesting components of why family offices can be unique and add value within the ecosystem. That industry expertise allows so much potential for connectivity, for partnerships, for, you know, really accelerating an underlying investment opportunity. We're seeing, you know, within the climate tech space, a number of family offices step in to more rapidly accelerate innovation and time to market. You look at Seed to Growth in Chicago with Lucas Walton and what they've done for food, or Horizons in Hong Kong, similarly in packaging and apparel and food. And it's amazing to see what that impact can be. It's a signal potentially for other venture funds to invest alongside, even within lead capacities. So we're seeing a lot of that. And this goes back decades. And, you know, early in my career, when I was pretty young, I got to work with Shamrock, the Disney family office. We purchased a TV station from them in the 80s and really got to see at an early age the potential of using connectivity within different market sets to create opportunity and really accelerate innovation.
Yeah, Michael, I appreciate it. And Rockaway, I know, you know, certainly you've had an experience investing across, I think, a lot of spectrums, but if you've seen other people and partners invest with you, I mean, any thoughts as to where expertise either has been added or add value has been added, or maybe unique ways that family offices can do things that other VCs can't? You've had experience sort of on both sides of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I see a lot of is families want to co-invest with other families. And there's a real interest in, you know, co-invest and building those relationships over time. And there's also a lot of trust in relationships. And so to me, what I see is there's a certain flywheel and there's a certain, I would say, multiplier effect when you bring family offices in as investors. And also there's usually connectivity globally. So, you know, to Michael's point about the office in Hong Kong, and then thinking about the Shamrock office, often these families are interconnected. And so bringing them in brings a network and sort of a lot of these names that are trusted behind them.
Yeah, and you know, you bring up an interesting point about family offices co-investing together. And, you know, given the climate we're in today, where I think some of that velocity of investment has slowed, you know, maybe, you know, over the past, again, decade, 12, 15, 20 years, where I think, you know, people were pretty active. This past year or so, people have slowed that down. Are you finding, you know, again, all three of you, family offices trying to find family offices more aggressively that can sort of co-invest and partner with them? And are you seeing that where family offices are sticking with sort of the groups they know in the geographies they know, or is that sort of global climate expanding and now you have family offices from Asia co-investing in the US and the US co-investing, you know, East Coast from West Coast and things like that? But how do you see sort of that market and that environment changing over the past, say, year or so? And what are you seeing out there as you're out?
Yeah, I can speak to this. I can speak to this a little bit. My sense is that family offices are a little bit more sort of risk off right now, and I think part of that is because they don't know exactly how to value their current portfolio, because probably a lot, if they were investing in sort of venture growth stages, a lot of those companies probably are a little bit overvalued, and because they're private companies, they don't really have to get remarked until they go and raise subsequent funds. So I think a lot of family offices are fairly content to sit on the sidelines right now and say, let's just see how the dust settles and kind of evaluate exactly how much our portfolio is right now. For us, we are kind of, we're a family investment vehicle, but we're also sort of just a new venture fund on the block. So, you know, we launched 14 months ago. we're excited that valuations are coming down. We're also excited that other venture investors are staying on the sidelines a bit more, because it means we get more access to deals we otherwise wouldn't. So it's been interesting to see this sort of bifurcation where some venture investors are like going full on, like this is a great time to invest. Then other ones are like, oh, let's just wait and see.
Yeah, just echoing that, I'm seeing very similar reactions market wide. And when you look at all the different places that family offices invest, it's a big question. But from our day-to-day within climate tech, it's actually become a very good time with this recent climate bill, with a lot of momentum on corporate and regulatory tailwinds. And so we're seeing a flood of interest coming in, and people wanting to learn more, and how do they get smart, and how do they figure out who are the right, managers and the right opportunities to focus on, and where things are really headed. So there are a few bright spots, but overall there's just a whole heck of a lot of uncertainty, and most FOs have that ability to be long view, right? And so to Andrew's point, why rush in right now, figure out where things are? I remember a few months back, before things were getting really choppy, it was like, oh, I'm so over indexed in venture because I'm having all these good, outcomes, and I'm just trying to figure out how to get a better balance to my portfolio construction and things like that. And so this is changing day by day, but right now it's been exciting to see all the interest within what we're doing within the family office community.
Yeah, and I think to echo that, there's, the risk aversion piece I'm definitely seeing, but the interest in co-invest is very strong. And so what I do hear a lot behind closed doors is a desire for people to see each other's deal flow within families, and to sort of share what they're looking at, because there is more trust. The other thing I've seen in the last, I would say 2 years since COVID, is more of an interest in mental health and in healthcare. Education, those are spaces that have really shifted. There's more of a desire to look at ed tech and sort of alternative sources of education and more equity around education. And from a sort of public health perspective, a lot has changed. And so I'm seeing more and more offices that are trying to leverage their networks and their resources to solve some really big global problems, because everyone was affected. I have a family office friend who came out of Shanghai and was incredibly traumatized by the lockdown, and was sharing with me that it had such an effect on his mental health, and is now really interested in some of these spaces he had never looked at before. And so I think it left an indelible impact on all of us and how we think about how we leverage capital for social good.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to transition a little bit as we talk about capital leading to social good. And I know both Michael, Andrew, and as well you, Rafaela, talked about sort of public health issues and climate change, and it's a good time, I think, to address impact investing, which anytime you go to one of these conferences, or anytime you spend enough time talking to family and offices, you hear that term impact investing. It's become a real sort of hot topic, but also one that I think can be controversial in terms of how you define impact, and certainly how you measure impact. I think if you talk to 10 people, you might get 10 different answers as to what impact investing really means. But we'd love to sort of get your thoughts as to what your definition of impact investing is, maybe even a little about how individually or within your offices you guys view family impact investing, and maybe ways that you are or are not participating in impact investing. And Andrew, why don't you lead us off?
Yeah. I think for us, we're specializing in an area that tends to be looked at as high impact, which is climate. And we're basically making a bet that we can invest in climate and not make any concessions on returns. I think a lot of times there's kind of been this perceived trade-off between high impact investing and investing purely for returns. And our bet is that basically within the climate tech space right now, for a bunch of reasons, we don't have to make that trade-off. There was like kind of a clean tech bust, if you will. Like 5 or 10 years ago. And I think that left everyone with a bit of a taste in their mouth that there is this sort of trade-off in this space. And for a bunch of reasons, Michael mentioned the IRA. We don't think that's the case. And it's great to see. I'm not an expert in other areas of the economy, but I would imagine that there are other sectors where you don't have to make those trade-offs as well.
Yeah, that was really well said. I'll jump from there. So, I sold a business that I had built over 10 years, about 8.5 years ago, had a good outcome that led to setting up the family office. And that was around the time Andrew's describing where clean tech had melted down more or less, and there was a very little interest of whether it could be an investable asset class. I had always cared about the environment from a philanthropic perspective, and I was concerned that philanthropy was ill-equipped to solve the climate crisis in and of itself, and that it needed for-profit solutions. And so really Pond Valley was set up to invest in highly profitable, scalable climate tech that we could actively measure environmental impact, carbon emissions, toxics, water, all these things that are very quantitative. And so that's what we've been on. We've invested in energy, agriculture, geospatial intel, consumer, and went on a real learning journey to find what was available, and was very, very pleasantly surprised by how these companies were doing, by the potential of these markets. They're some of the biggest markets in the world, right? So the famous, the next 1,000 unicorns will be in climate tech quote from Larry Fink, I think is apropos. There's going to be so much in moving us from this linear system where we end up throwing out more than 90% of everything we consume to a more circular one where we have to better move throughout this global supply chains and localized supply chains, all kinds of different products, and really work to decarbonize at the scale and pace with which we need to from IPCC and others to keep planet moving forward. So, impact for me is very specifically, how are we doing? How many parts per million are there of carbon in the atmosphere? And like very quantitative measures that we can take and address and focus on with our underlying investments. And I really like that. But to pay homage to the question, their impact can mean a lot of different things. And these same principles can be applied to many different verticals. And Rahale, I may want to put some additional clarity to that.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I think for me, impact has always been a really big part of my life. I grew up under the desk, so to speak, watching my father, run AllianceBernstein and then transition, or it was then Bernstein, transition to basically full-time impact work in nonprofit. And I think for me, it's always really meant bringing whatever special qualities we each have that are unique to us personally. So we all have gifts and sort of unique qualities and unique personality traits. And I think the biggest one that I tend to focus on is empathy and compassion. We live in a very disconnected world. We're hyper-connected technology-wise, but many of us feel very lonely. Mental health is sort of the biggest challenge, I think, of our time. And so for me, it's sort of how do we focus on the people in front of us and be present with one another and add real value to each other's lives and go really deep with the people that are in our inner circles and our worlds. And just a quick story I'll share, because I think that just especially what's happened in the last number of years, we know homelessness is a huge crisis. One of the things that I have a practice of doing often is buying homeless people food. I usually don't give money because I never know what it's going to be used for, but I love buying food. And I remember once there was a woman here in Manhattan, I bought her lunch and the cops thought she was just loitering. And she looked at me, she pointed when I brought her a burger and she said, "You see, I told you that she was bringing me my lunch." And in that moment, there was this feeling of I restored her dignity. She was sitting there in a garbage bag. And it was one of the most impactful moments in my life of sitting there going, I didn't write a big check. I'm not sitting on any board. I didn't just, get involved in a company, but I changed her sense of self. And so I think that it's this combination of small moments of really showing up for people and practicing kindness and giving and compassion. Tikkun olam is the Hebrew term for making the world a brighter, better place. And from an investment perspective, I tend to think about how do we invest and think about companies that are solving global problems. For me personally, as you mentioned, I work with Michael Smith. I'm very passionate about what they do at Regeneration, him and Dan. And I am also deeply interested in mental health and healthcare and thinking about how we can create more equity in these systems that are very much built to the advantage of few and the disadvantage of many.
Yeah, and I know Rafaela, certainly it's not just words that you do practice kindness, and certainly somebody who lives by that mantra. And it's interesting as you talk, and the three of you were talking about things like public health and mental health and climate change and impact investing and all these things. Here we are, a panel about second gens, and the generation before us, those words weren't on the mind, right? That was just, these are new concepts, new things. And having spent time with a fifth generation family, the patriarch certainly didn't have this on his mind. These were words that were made up, and in some cases just not important. Not that they were good or bad, it's just the way generations are. So as you kind of look at needs from one generation to the next, what's important from one generation to the next, how do you sort of work your way through some of those issues and bring generation one along for the ride in a way where they feel that you're not just some hippie out there spending my money, but rather doing something that's important and beneficial to the growth and the legacy of the family. And Rafaela, I don't know if that's something maybe you want to lead here, or at least get us started.
Yeah, sure. I think I tend to have a tremendous amount of respect for patriarchs and for family legacy and ancestors, depending on how we all sort of talk about it. And when I work with families, what I see often is that there's a lot of change in each generation. And in particular, as you mentioned before, this term social impact and this emphasis on philanthropy. And also, I think just sort of conscious capitalism has really shifted in the last, let's call it 15 years, even more than I think ever before. And often there's a lot of challenges within families when a patriarch is used to bifurcating and investing in philanthropy. And then the next generation is thinking about, investing, to Andrew's point, about not compromising returns, but investing in high performing companies that are solving big problems. And so I tend to look at how do you honor legacy while also individuating and sort of handing a baton to the next generation in a way that empowers them to carry it forward. So really it's about, in my mind, respect. Respect from the younger generation to what they've learned from the prior generation or generations. And in some respects, it's the older generation letting go of some of the control and respecting the leadership of the younger generation and their maturation and joining the family and sort of crafting the next steps in that family legacy.
That's great. Thank you. Michael or Andrew, anything to add?
I think for me, the way I sort of pay homage, I think it's definitely, it's just specific to my situation and the dynamic that we have, but I'm investing only family capital. And so I definitely feel a lot of pressure to make good investment decisions and to work really hard. And, I think I honestly don't spend, the honest answer for me is that I don't spend a ton of time thinking about these dynamics. And I think the reason is just because on a day-to-day basis, I wake up and I've got the to-do lists and emails and meetings, and I just go through it all. And if I'm lucky, I have time to spend time with friends and exercise. And so I think the way I sort of think about it is just to work very hard and to try to make good investment decisions, obviously treat people well and sort of represent the family well. But I think I'm fairly kind of heads down in my approach.
Yeah, and Andrew, I think you bring up a good point. And hey, look, the magic of panels like this, we pre-called a little bit and discussed some of these. And one of the questions talks about, the pressure of the second gen. And so certainly many advantages to being the second generation of a wealthy family, but definitely very different, pressures and challenges. And so, you make a point, Andrew, to paraphrase it, there's pressure to make good investments and to work hard. But, as the three of you have sort of looked at, the challenge of honoring the legacy of the first generation, creating a legacy for the second generation, creating the path for the third generation to create their own legacy and continue the first and the second, but also just the pressure of what's expected, of second generation family members. How do you feel, you deal with that and sort of what's in place to, make that, I think, a little more tenable for second gen?
Yeah, it's a really interesting position to be in, being a second gen, right? Because you grow up in this, people call it a shadow or however it's you want to characterize it, but having such a strong, powerful, in my case, father figure who was just so amazing in all these different ways, it was just normal almost, and totally the weight of that was very very real. In the community, everywhere I'd go, everyone just loved my dad. And I was unusual because he gave me so much opportunity within his organization to thrive. This was like the mid 90s. Digital was just happening in all of our TV stations. We had this group of 30 stations, and I got to effectively run in high school all our websites. And, I'm negotiating with people like Mark Cuban for our retransmission rights and like doing stuff in high school that I can't even imagine what you'd normally get. And, for better or worse, I lost my dad at a young age and had to step into helping run the family business, which was a whole other dynamic and a real trial by fire and a heck of a lot of pressure. And so, what I'm excited about and what I see today is there's a lot more tools, a lot more conversations like this, a lot more community and network. I didn't have or really know anyone other than the other families that I happened to just know. And I didn't really I wasn't properly equipped, and it was very challenging. But there can be so much good if the right structures are in place, if the right values are set, if the right conditions are put for that to happen. And then even thinking about Gen 3 and beyond, there's all these other dynamics, right? So I feel really blessed later in life looking back, but in the moment, there were some really, really challenging and life-defining things that happened for me around this topic.
Yeah. Michael, thank you very much. And Rakale or Andrew, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, so I actually kind of had the opposite dynamic when I was growing up, and that I had very little exposure to the family business. I really I didn't really work in finance until now, really in any sort of meaningful way. And I think 16-year-old me would have thought that I would have not liked that I sort of joined the family business a little bit and kind of am in this finance world. But the truth is I actually like it. I mean, I think there's something kind of in my blood that is, it just sort of clicks with this line of work. And as I was saying earlier, I think I would have thought that these types of issues would sort of keep me up at night if I was kind of in the family business. But really, I just don't think about it as much as I would have thought.
Yeah, 16-year-old you might not have thought you're going that route, but I'm sure you'd be happy with the outcome. But it's interesting, and I'll transition. I'll tell a minor story, but in terms of the decision making, then as you get from Gen 1 to Gen 2, and maybe we talked about the differences in the way people think through things. Be interested in sort of how you deal with maybe different approaches and decision making on whether it's investments or whatnot. And so I'll throw out that what we've done, because Gen 1 does have different issues than Gen 2 that they find important. So we've created vehicles for Gen 2 to lead the investment on their own. And they're a younger group than maybe we are here. So we allow them to pick the issues that are important in terms of impact, allow them to make the investments they feel are important. We've created the structure around them to help them do diligence and to help them sort of with the process, but have allowed, and there's another family here, very famous old family that has sort of done the same thing with each generation. They have their own source of funds that they can make investments with. So just in terms of, be interested in how you deal with those decision-making process for different generations, especially if there's maybe, I don't want to say conflict, but just differing opinions in what's important, especially in terms of impact and things like that. I don't know, Michael, if you
I'll take that from our end. So, we put into place an investment committee within our family, and it's meets regularly to review opportunities. If someone wants to make an investment into something, draw up a memo and treat it like an institutional fund would, where we discuss it and get viewpoints and make sure that we have consensus around the investment decision for the family office to move forward. And that feels like the right and smart way for us in protocols. Not everyone is engaged, but the group that's on the committee is, and reports back to the wider family on what we've decided to invest in, and then ongoing measurement and evaluation for those investments. And we looked with foundation and philanthropy to do the same things to make sure that we're being thoughtful about where we're deploying all of our resources into a variety of initiatives. We support a couple hundred locally here in the Santa Barbara area where I'm based, and so just keeping up with that amount of philanthropies in and of itself is quite an effort. And so, the processes and regular check-ins and communication is key, and has led to a lot less confusion and overall in our processes. Yeah,
absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Andrew.
For us, I mean, we're still kind of figuring this out. So my dad started kind of what is a family investment office, I think around 6 years ago. And so he's basically involved there. Like he's seeded it, and it's now transitioning to raise outside capital. We don't have right now any family members who work in that entity, but my sisters and I each have basically investment funds that in some way are connected to our family office or family capital. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic because we all work in the same industry. We all speak the same language. So we're all sort of getting reps at this, but we don't do it together. So when those times do arise that we have to make a philanthropic decision together, we don't have as many reps. So I think there's kind of trade-offs between doing things together as a family, where maybe there might lead to more arguments and things like that, versus everyone being a little bit more siloed, but you don't have as much practice working together as a family.
Yeah, Andrew, appreciate that. And, so I guess as we sort of transition now into some of the, we talked about the Gen 1 decision-making and differences in impact and things, but, I think the experience for a Gen 2 certainly is different than a Gen 1. Oftentimes a Gen 1 maybe didn't, the old shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves anecdote, maybe they didn't come from a lot of money. Maybe, they worked very hard. Gen 2 has a different issue to deal with. And oftentimes people know they're wealthy from day one, from birth. And so that can have a deep impact on, both family, but also relationships and what's expected from you and why people maybe want to get into the inner circle. So, just as we talk about wealth and the benefits, but sometimes I think some of the issues when it comes to things like, relationships, and Rakalea, if you maybe could give us some thoughts as to, how you've had to deal with and other Gen 2s that you've run into relationships, reflecting on the wealth that you're sort of, entitled to.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to think of it as a privilege and a responsibility. In terms of my name, I've had a recognizable name my entire life. Everywhere I go, for the most part, people put two and two together, especially because my first name is fairly unique. And so I think that when I was younger, I really struggled with it. To Andrew's earlier, my 16-year-old self wanted to get as far away from the family office world as I possibly could. I moved to Israel at 19 during the Intifada and stayed at all different, places all over Europe and all over the Middle East, and went through this journey of, who do I want to be when I grow up, and how much of that do I want to bring into my life? And for a long time, really lived a very different life because I did want to disassociate from some of the issues that I saw in the wealth holder communities and in my own family. Like Michael, my father died when I was young. I was 14 when my father passed away. And I think for me, there was a lot of trauma, frankly, around some things I had experienced growing up in the community. And I think also as a woman and a woman who has been married and divorced, there were challenges around, again, my last name and my inheritance. And so I think for me, there's been a tremendous amount of learning, a tremendous amount of growth over these last 15, 20 years as I've grown into it. And I think I've also really learned who my friends are. It's been a process figuring that out because I tend to be generous. And so I've learned how to pull back to some extent, to wait and see who people really are and how they show up in my life before I do too much. Something Michael and I talked about the other day, actually. And so there's just been a lot of learning. And I think at this point, for me at least, I try to just bring my full authentic self, like who I really am, and do that in every situation. But there are some boundaries that I've put into place, and it's something I hear often with a number of next gens. They'll often take their credit cards out and just pay for things. And I see many men in dating and the family office world who talk to me privately who want to shower people with gifts or luxury trips or things of that nature. And I always tell them, don't do that. Let people get to know you for who you really are and split the bill. But if you're always paying for everything and you're in that seat of power, creates a lot of confusion in relationships over time. So one of the things that I do often is try to create some of that resourcing Michael mentioned earlier, work with families and next gens on how to have some of these healthier boundaries and how to think about relationships and parenting and the value of every dollar, because it does change how money does change relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Raquel. Michael or Andrew, anything to add?
No, I mean, I can totally relate to a lot of the dynamics that were brought up there, and it's been interesting. My two partners in Shorewind, they have now kind of so we're at Shorewind, we're pretty public about my family's involvement in it, and with my two partners, they've been kind of going through this transition of trying to figure out, is this person, are we in this deal, or is this person, do they want to work with us because of the family or because they like me personally? And my response has kind of been like, look, you guys will drive yourselves crazy if you're going to analyze each and every relationship and trying to figure out, does this person like me for me or because of something else? And I think it's, it's something over the years I've gotten, you try to make judgment calls on that, and sometimes you get it right, sometimes you get it wrong, and there's no right or wrong kind of line in the sand, and you just have to do what feels comfortable for you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Michael?
Yeah, both great insights. And I echo a lot of it. I've been in a small community here in Santa Barbara where, even though I have a generic name, everyone kind of knows who we are and what we do. And it's definitely, it definitely changes the way that you approach things. It just inevitably does. And what Andrew just said was pitch perfect. Like, you gotta focus on what moves the needle and passions and where you want to make a difference in this world. And if you can do that and build confidently around that, sometimes it's going to help, sometimes it's going to be a distraction, but just having that focus and goal is the best thing that you can do around the topic. And because it is so complex and it does have so many dynamics. And if you think about it too much, it will not inevitably lead to good things. So having that focus and being in partnership, with your family and not working against is also really important. Like getting to the root of what some of the alignments are, right? Like how do we do this? How do we function? Having real conversations around that is super important.
Yeah, and I think, Michael, you make a great point, and it's great. Certainly for you and the panelists to discuss, but also I think it leads into, how do you deal with the next generation as parents? And I don't know, and Raquel, I know this is an area close to you and in your heart, but how do you deal with sort of that next generation as a parent now, with sort of all these, issues we discussed, and how do you set your children up for sort of the issues they may face, and then being successful in their own right.
I'm happy to start. I guess in our home, for me, rituals were very important from when my children were very, very young. So I've been volunteering with often a baby carrier and a stroller for years, because I wanted my children to learn how to give back from a really early age. And I believe in that being tangible and something they can actually experience. So they actually work at a food pantry pretty much every week, and I have pictures of them at varying ages running around with, bags of oranges and other things, and they'll never forget that. So for them, they know that there's a position of community service, gratitude, and sort of these ingrained values. And since they were also very young, for me, there's been a focus on financial literacy and earning their own way. I meet a lot of next gens who, frankly, are very lost because they never had to work. They weren't in a position where they had chores or responsibilities. And I didn't have that when I was growing up. I was very much overindulged. And so I kind of learned how to parent by what not to do in some ways. And so at our home, we have 3 jars. One is save, one is spend, and one is charity, or tzedakah in Hebrew. And I give them actual bills because I want them, again, to have that experience and then to remember that. And so whenever they've asked me for things over the years, I tell them to go back to their jars and see if they've earned enough, or to make a list and wait for a holiday or a birthday. And so there's just been this consciousness around the value of every dollar and of hard work. And also around why giving back is so important. So I think for me, those elements have been very sort of front and center since they were very young.
I may take some of those ideas from Rachalea. I love it. Brilliant. I've got a almost 8-year-old daughter and a 5-year-old son. And my wife and I think about this and talk about this on a daily basis. It is not easy giving the same sort of like high quality upbringing that you want to bring to them and show them all the things that you want them to see, and try to explain the dual complicatedness of, we have this amazing life where we get to go and see and do all these things, and then have them see homelessness on the streets and the inequities and all these challenges that children are very open to and pick up on. And so this is something we work on very actively. We're being strategic in terms of screens and sharing and other families, and working to bring them around people that we really think are all share equal or like similar values of things. But it will be a lifelong process. And we're just starting to get to the point where they're getting very sophisticated with how they see the world. And it brings up a lot of stuff from my childhood as well. And some of it's very healing and connected, and some of it's quite challenging as well. So I'm enjoying the process, and I'm learning, and I love getting tips from people like Rachalea about how to parent better as well.
If I can add one quick anecdote that I thought was funny from the other evening. I was sitting around the table. So I have 4 children. They're 9, 11, 13, and 15, because I'm highly organized. And my 13-year-old says at the Shabbat dinner, he goes, we're very spoiled. And I look at him and I was like, would you like one fewer meal a day? Or what is it that you mean by that? And he said, well, we go on all these amazing trips, to what Michael just said, and we have our beautiful home and we have this amazing life, and look at everyone out there. And I said to him, well, I think what you mean is you're really blessed. I think that let's reframe that and think about how you can take all these blessings and create more good in the world with what you have. And so then we started a conversation about sort of each of their personalities and their quirks and the things they enjoy, and how they can take that and do more good in the world. But I did think his self-awareness was very positive at a young age. And, as opposed to, I think, living in a bubble, he recognizes sort of how fortunate he is. And so he wants to cure cancer. So we're hoping that that will happen sometime in the next few decades. So he has some positive aspirations there. But it's an ongoing conversation always. And, us personally, and I know other families like this have made certain choices around the type of home we live in or the cars we drive to try and minimize some of it for them so that the bubble isn't sort of too isolated and too insular.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Andrew, anything to add?
So I don't have kids yet. I think soon, hopefully, but I think I am grateful that I have time to strategize and think about this stuff, and there's people I can lean on for their advice, like you guys, and it does make me think, just from my parents' perspective. They were coming into a lot of wealth as they were raising us, and so they were dealing with a lot of this stuff on the fly. So I am grateful that I have time to strategize and think about it. Not that that's going to make it, any easier. But yeah, I mean, I think about these things too, like the cars you drive, the houses you live in, but still trying to instill those values of remaining humble and working hard. And I'm sure it's tough.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, as we sort of near the end of this panel discussion, let's bring it full circle and talk a little. We talked obviously about decision making and family dynamic, and the challenges each generation will face. And we also talked about, obviously, on the investment side. But given everything that we talked about today, impact investing, and then broaden it out even further into the world that we face today, which is unique and different, even just from a year ago. From a geopolitical and economic and social aspect, bringing all that together, how do you think that's going to affect your decision making, your approach to investing as we go forward here in the next 12, 24 months? And Andrew, maybe I'll pick on you to lead this off.
Yeah, I think definitely, I think you're going to see impact investing and investing for returns. I think that the center of that Venn diagram is going to grow a lot over time. And I think government and regulation is going to play a role in that, particularly in climate. I think for me, part of the question is as I continue in my investment career, which I will probably always kind of be somewhat around the family, is do I still want to prioritize kind of that the center of that Venn diagram, or drift more to just we're looking purely for returns? And I think that's probably something that a lot of family offices deal with, because they have flexible mandates where they can invest in anything from early stage privates to publics. And so that trying to kind of hone in on your vision as a family office, or just as individuals within a family office, I think is pretty key to help kind of guide you towards exactly how you want to spend your time.
Yeah, I'll go next. So for us, we won't change how we've been doing things in the next 12 to 24 months. When I've started, focusing on same issue as Andrew and climate, I got to know what was happening with this crisis in a way that really motivated me to fully focus on doing everything I could to address it. Regeneration and our work with Pond Valley is really an expression of that. And it's not a short-term issue. This is very much a long view issue. So, our goal is thinking how over the next 10, 20, 50 years, how do we move the needle on putting atmospheric carbon back into natural systems and regenerating planet and building more resilient structures and adapting to changes we're already feeling right now. And so the time is not to slow down now, depending on all the different indicators and where they're going. Like, this is really urgent and important work that we do. We take it very, very seriously. And so anyone who's interested, check out regeneration.vc. Love to know more about what you're doing, if it can be, advantageous, or we can partner and collaborate. It's a global issue. So, we're looking globally and in all these different sectors around consumer industries. So love to know more about, what this folks watching are doing too, and look forward to collaborating.
So Rob, I think that the last 2 to 3 years, for me personally, how it's impacted how I think, One is I've been passionate about child protection and child sexual abuse prevention and impact investing through munis for years. But I think during COVID, I was especially terrified, and I use that word deliberately because children globally were essentially locked up, often with people that were hurting them, whether that's domestic violence or child sexual abuse or poverty or other issues. So I believe that we're going to see a tremendous uptick in reporting around child sexual abuse globally within the next 15 years, considering the average length of disclosure is 17 years. So I believe we're about 15 years out from massive crisis. And since it's such an anemic space, I've sort of doubled down on my focus on both raising dollars for advocacy and for lobbying and legislation and for parent education. Because I do believe that parents ultimately sit at the nexus of all of the institutions and all of the places that their child exists. And so I feel that that's a very orphan cause that I feel called to really spend a lot of my time and energy on. And it is global. I was actually in Asia recently, and someone approached me and said, you know, I looked you up and we don't know how to talk about that here. And it's not a topic that we know how to address. And it really hit me very hard, sort of emotionally, thinking about how many children and how many families were affected by COVID from a safety and a mental health perspective. And the other thing that we're seeing increasing worldwide is also suicide and adolescent suicide. And so for me, those are areas that I spend a lot of time on, both from an investing perspective, advocacy, and philanthropy. And I guess the last thing I'll say is that I think we really need to focus as an investment community on unity. We see so much divisiveness and so much hate in our world. And I know it sounds cheesy, but whatever ways we can come together and bring our sort of stories and our cultures and what unites us as humanity together for the planet, for humanity, for human health, for our children, for the future, is something that I think would be incredibly important for all of us as family offices and investors and philanthropists to be focusing on.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we are at the end of the time, I want to first off, thank Jason Ho and his team for putting this all together. But thank all of you for taking the time to listen to this and hear the opinions. But obviously, to Andrew, to Michael, and to Rahalea, thank you so much. For your bringing your passion and your experience and your knowledge to this discussion today. And certainly wish you best of luck as you tackle some pretty serious and heavy topics and issues, but are having some serious impact as well in creating change and creating the things that we need to see in the world. And I, can't thank you enough for that, but also the energizing sort of impact you have on, I think, people listening to this, because you're not just sitting back saying, hey, got a ton of money, I'll just hang out. You're making direct impact. You're doing some great things. So appreciate that and appreciate all your comments today. And I think with that, we'll say thank you and hope everybody enjoyed the discussion today. I know the three panelists have said if you want to reach out, go ahead and reach out, but to your benefit, because they're three great people. Thank you so much for everybody. Appreciate it. Thank you.